We've been talking a lot today about the split screen that we're seeing from the two presidential campaigns, the normal retail politics and earnest policy pitches from Kamala Harris and Tim Walz, and the weird, alienating, combative style of Donald Trump and J.D. Vance. It puts into stark relief what's at stake for the country. An administration led by someone who believes she has good ideas for the country, one led by a convicted felon who's openly talked about being a dictator. But there's also a cultural phenomenon underpinning this campaign. One side of the aisle is presenting an ever-shrinking portrait of what it means to be an American, deserving of equal protection under the law. The other side is expanding it, reaching out across racial, cultural, and ideological lines. Under Donald Trump's leadership, today's Republican Party has moved away from traditional conservative values, embracing instead xenophobic fringe theories and a white nationalist vision of patriotism. Spin the wheel of Donald Trump's speeches, and you'll hear the same message of what a real American looks like, typically white, Christian, and straight.
And we do not answer to the bureaucrats in Washington. We answer to God in heaven. You're not even allowed to say that anymore. Who likes the Ten Commandments, by the way, going up in the schools? Who would think that somebody would want open borders where people flood in by the millions from all over the world, from prisons and from mental institutions and a lot of terrorists in record numbers? Nobody's seen anything like it. Who would think that men playing in women's sports is okay? Who would think that? We stood up to the communists, Marxists, and fascists to defend religious liberty like no other president has ever done. We will protect Christians in our schools, in our military, in our government, in our workplaces, in our hospitals, and in our public square.
So if you're keeping score at home, Donald Trump says he's fighting against immigrants, the LGBTQ plus population, non-Christians, and really anyone else who believes in the secular values on which this country was supposedly founded. Trump says he's fighting for Christians, which is not bad, but it looks like a pretty small tent to me. The Democrats, on the other hand, are doing something a little differently. Kamala Harris's move to the top of the ticket instantly reinvigorated the Democratic Party base. And then with the addition of Tim Walz as a running mate, a local high school coach who taught his daughter how to drive, a military vet who put himself through college, the ticket's drawn in more supporters, including from across the aisle. It's easy for the far right to tear down women and people of color who compete against white men for political office. Not so easy with Tim Walz. So Trump's campaign, with its ever-shrinking definition of who counts as a real American, has decided to attack Walz's career in public service.
They've never held a private sector job in their entire professional careers, and it's no wonder they're both socialists. They're actually beyond socialists. I think they skipped over socialists.
Beyond socialists. That's probably news to millions of American workers in the military, and who work in public schools, who work in government, who work in law enforcement, public service workers who make up the backbone of communities across America, socialists. In Trump's worldview, these workers hold jobs that are unworthy of real Americans. Mind you, Walz is a former geography teacher. He's a football coach. He served 24 years in the National Guard, but apparently those don't count as real jobs, according to Donald Trump. On that same day last month, Trump spokesperson Caroline Sunshine repeated this latest talking point on a far-right media network.
He's never held a real job in his life, by the way. He spent all of his life running for Congress.
Never had a real job, a private sector job, in Trump's exact words, unlike the real estate tycoon whose businesses have declared bankruptcy at least 6 times. Never had a real job, unlike the East Coast billionaire who inherited a significant chunk of his wealth from his father. Never had a real job, unlike the twice-convicted felon notoriously known for stiffing his workers, including carpenters, dishwashers, painters, waiters, even his own lawyers, who all say he doesn't pay his workers. Walz may be a new target, but the GOP strategy remains the same, expanding their ever-growing list of Americans who don't qualify. According to the writer Ana Lutz-Fernandez, quote, these attacks do more than insult a growing list of voting groups, though. They offer a window into the GOP's preferred fantasy, namely that that if people would just stay in their place, refugees and immigrants in their home countries, women in their homes, people of color in menial jobs, while rich white men hold powerful political positions and set the rules for everyone, real Americans would feel that the country was great again. But this is not a vision that has widespread appeal outside the MAGA-verse, end quote. The Harris-Walz campaign seems clued into that fact. standing ready to scoop up all the many Americans who don't belong in Trump's America, reclaiming patriotism, reimagining the American flag as a symbol that welcomes and uplifts all Americans. And what's at stake in November is not just democracy, but the fate of all people who don't fit Donald Trump's definition of what it means to be American.